Pauline, your party's been mentioned a lot by the government today. They're suggesting that the coalition is trying to steal your voters by talking up a divisive immigration agenda. What do you make of that?
Well, Chris, it's music to my ears to actually hear an immigration policy out of the coalition government, so it's great to hear it. And a lot of what they're saying is directly out of my policy booklet myself, you know, what we put out there, but it's good to hear and it's about time. The government is very clearly scared of both the coalition and One Nation, you know, expressing our views about the migration in Australia and what has happened. You mentioned about 300,000 a year. Chris, it's closer to 500,000 a year of people coming in. We've had the highest intake of migrants in the history of this country of 1,800 people a day. And when Burke says about new migrants coming here, you know, skilled labour, what are these nail technicians, masseurs, dog walkers, Uber drivers? Because in the figures between 2022 and 23, we only had 1,800 construction workers that came into the country. You know, these weren't skilled migrants. They're allowing these students come here, change their courses and get on a bridging visa and stay here in the country. So it's been farcical. The whole lot has been uncontrolled. And Chris, I'll make this point. 30% of Australians are foreign born. So we haven't allowed time for people to assimilate, become Australian and accept our way of life and culture, and I'm concerned about that changing as we see what's happened. And we brought so many wrong people into the country over the years, people that don't want to be Australians, don't respect our laws, and I'm fed up with seeing the Australian flag basically spat on by a lot of people that don't respect it. So Australians are angry about this. They've been warmly welcoming migrants for decades.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
And it's been wonderful. But we really need to have a look at the calibre of the people, where they're coming from, and we need to have a debate about this and speak about it.
Yeah, it's been pathetic the way Labor have just tried to attack the coalition over this, because in his press conference today, Tony Burke had to admit they had problems. He admitted that there are tens of thousands of people overstaying visas that he can't get out of the country. He says he'll do something in a few months. He's been in power for 4 years. And the other point is he's admitted that there are still people coming in from Gaza 6 months after the ceasefire. So there are real problems here. The question I want to ask you about the coalition's approach is, do you agree with Labor? Do you think that the coalition's looking to get voters back from One Nation? Or isn't this really the coalition going back to where it was on immigration back in the Howard years?
I think they're going a little bit stronger now than what they were in the Howard years. I think they are very concerned about the votes they're losing to One Nation. But, Chris, they have to open up their eyes, OK? They're not kittens anymore, they're cats, and we're in this game that we have to do what's right for the country. And, you know, we do need to do something about it. And Labor is playing this game of catching up with One Nation. Regardless of whether they're catching up with One Nation, our policies, the fact is we have to discuss this, and policy has to change the way we've had it under the Labor Party. You know, there's over 25,000 people in the country that have been here for more than 10 years, overstayed their visas. What has the government done about it? Absolutely nothing. These people are working here. Are they paying their taxes? Probably not. So it's a whole system that we have here has failed us as a nation. We've got lack of housing, rental accommodation, these people overstayed. When you come to Australia, you sign a contract. I intend to stay here for only 3 months. Well, that's your contract that you've signed. And if these people don't go back, if you're found, well, then you're sent out of the country, never, ever to return again.
Absolutely.
I'd be very extremely hard on this. And these students, once you finish your course, then you go back to your country, you apply to come here. You don't get to stay in the country.
It's not unreasonable, Pauline, and it's a debate this country has to see, and it has to see some action on these issues.
If you thought the biggest political fight this week would be between Labor and the coalition, think again. Because one of the sharpest exchanges wasn't across the government benches at all. It was about the coalition's own immigration proposals and whether they've finally shifted closer to positions One Nation has been arguing for over many years. Now, before anyone starts barracking for one side or the other, let's slow things down for a second. Immigration is one of those topics that gets everyone talking. Mention it at the local pub, around the barbecue, or on social media, and before long, everyone's got an opinion. Housing, rental prices, jobs, infrastructure, universities, skilled workers, it all ends up connected. That's exactly why this interview grabbed so much attention. This week, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson was asked whether the coalition's latest immigration announcements were an attempt to win back voters who had shifted towards One Nation. Her response was immediate. Hanson welcomed the fact that immigration had become a major political issue, arguing that stronger debate on Australia's migration settings was long overdue. She also claimed that some of the coalition's recent messaging reflected policies that One Nation has promoted for years. Whether that's a fair political assessment is something voters will decide, but it highlights just how central immigration has become to Australia's political conversation. The interviewer then pushed the discussion further. Was this really the coalition moving back towards its traditional approach on immigration, or was it responding to changing public opinion and increased competition from minor parties? Hanson argued that both major parties had been forced to pay greater attention to immigration because Australians were increasingly raising concerns about housing affordability, infrastructure pressures, and the overall pace of population growth. Those are issues that have featured heavily in political debate over recent years. Governments, business groups, economists, and community organisations often agree that migration brings economic benefits, but they continue to disagree about the appropriate intake, the mix of skilled workers, students, and humanitarian entrants, and how quickly infrastructure and housing can keep up with population growth. That's where the political disagreement begins. Hanson argued that Australia should reduce migration levels significantly and strengthen enforcement of visa rules. She also raised concerns about people overstaying visas and called for tighter compliance measures. The interviewer challenged several of those points, noting that migration policy involves difficult trade-offs. Universities rely heavily on international students. Many industries continue to report workforce shortages. Regional employers often argue they struggle to recruit enough workers locally, and successive governments, both Labor and Coalition, have supported skilled migration as one way of addressing those shortages. So the question becomes, how do you balance economic needs with pressure on housing and public services? That's not an easy question. It's one Parliament has been debating for decades. Hanson maintained that Australia should place greater emphasis on enforcing existing visa conditions and ensuring migration programs better match the country's long-term needs. The interviewer responded by suggesting that if parties want to persuade Australians, they'll need to explain not only what they would reduce, but how those decisions would affect universities, businesses, regional communities, and the broader economy. That exchange captured the heart of the debate. One side argued the current system needs significant change. The other highlighted the complexity of implementing that change. Outside the studio, the discussion continued. Housing affordability remains one of the biggest concerns facing Australians. Rental vacancies remain tight in many parts of the country. Businesses continue looking for skilled workers. Universities continue competing internationally for students. Those realities mean immigration policy rarely affects just one area. It touches almost every part of Australia's economy and society. Political reactions were predictable. Supporters of stronger migration controls argued Australia should slow population growth until housing and infrastructure catch up. Others argued that migration has long been an important contributor to economic growth, regional development, and addressing workforce shortages, and that reforms should be carefully balanced rather than driven by a single issue. That's why this conversation isn't likely to disappear anytime soon. Every major party now knows immigration will remain one of the defining political issues heading into future elections. Exactly where the balance should be struck is something Australians will continue debating, in Parliament, in the media, and around dinner tables across the country. One thing is certain: What began as a discussion about party politics quickly became a much broader conversation about the future direction of Australia's migration system. And with housing, cost of living, and economic growth all remaining front of mind, expect immigration to stay firmly at the centre of political debate. Here's part 2, continuing seamlessly from where part 1 left off. It keeps the same conversational Australian style, adds more context, and presents the competing political positions without treating any party's claims as established fact. By this point, the interview had shifted well beyond party politics. It had become a conversation about what sort of Australia voters want over the next decade, because whether you're living in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, or a regional town hundreds of kilometres from the nearest capital city, the same questions keep coming up. Why are houses so expensive? Why are rents still climbing? Why does it feel harder to get ahead than it did a few years ago? And where does immigration fit into all of that? The interviewer wasn't letting the conversation stay in broad political slogans. He kept pushing for specifics. If migration is reduced, what happens to industries that rely on overseas workers? What happens to universities that depend on international students? And what happens to businesses already saying they can't find enough staff? They're fair questions. Because immigration isn't just one policy, it's tied into almost every part of Australia's economy. Healthcare, construction, agriculture, hospitality, education, technology. Every one of those sectors has, at different times, argued that overseas workers help fill gaps where local recruitment has been difficult. At the same time, many Australians continue to raise concerns about housing affordability, pressure on public services, and population growth. That's why the debate has become so politically significant. Hanson argued that governments have spent too long talking about the economic benefits of migration without giving enough attention to the pressure rapid population growth can place on housing, infrastructure, and local communities. She said Australians deserve an open discussion about where migration levels should sit and how the system should operate. The interviewer responded by pointing out that immigration policy has always involved trade-offs. Lower migration might reduce demand in some areas over time, but employers, universities, and business groups often warn it can also affect workforce availability and economic activity. That's where politics meets reality. There aren't many simple answers. And that's probably why the issue has become one of the biggest battlegrounds in Australian politics. The conversation then turned to the coalition. One of the key questions was whether the coalition's recent language on immigration reflected a genuine policy shift or whether it was responding to changing voter sentiment. Hanson said she believed the coalition had become stronger in its public messaging compared with previous years. She also suggested that increased competition from minor parties had encouraged the major parties to pay closer attention to issues that voters were raising. Political analysts have made similar observations more broadly. As support for minor parties and independents has grown, both Labor and the coalition have adjusted their messaging on a range of issues, including housing, energy, regional development and migration. Whether that's a response to public opinion, electoral competition, or both is something political observers continue to debate. Meanwhile, Labor has defended its own migration policies by arguing that reforms are being implemented to strengthen the integrity of the migration system while supporting Australia's economic needs. Government ministers have also argued that skilled migration remains important for sectors facing genuine labour shortages and that migration settings should balance economic, social and humanitarian considerations. That contrast is likely to remain central to political debate in the months ahead. Outside Canberra, reactions continued flowing across social media. Some viewers praised Hanson's willingness to raise issues they believe are not discussed often enough. Others argued that Australia's migration debate should remain grounded in economic evidence, workforce needs, and Australia's international obligations. As always, opinion was divided. But perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from the interview. Immigration is no longer just another policy topic. It's become one of the defining political questions facing Australia. Not because everyone agrees, Quite the opposite. Because Australians disagree on what the right balance should be. Some want significantly lower migration. Others believe the focus should be on building more homes, improving infrastructure, and expanding services while maintaining a carefully managed migration program. Those competing visions are now playing out not only in Parliament, but in television interviews, community forums, and conversations around kitchen tables across the country. And with housing affordability and the cost of living continuing to dominate public discussion, don't expect this debate to fade away anytime soon. If anything, it's only just getting started. So, what do you reckon? Should Australia's migration settings change, or is the bigger challenge increasing housing supply and infrastructure to match population growth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, but keep the discussion respectful. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the latest political debate, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update from Canberra.